In this video I will share with you everything you need about 3D printing your own jewelry with any machine and any resin. So please sit down because it's going to be a long video. Alright guys, here we are on CG Trader, which is a famous website for trading 3D models, and we are going to need a model, of course, and I'm going to search a skull ring for this video. I'm going to click on the free. Let's see if we can find some free rings. Let's scroll down a little bit, and let's say I like this ring and this ring, for example. I'm going to simply click on free download. I'm going to wait a little bit, and now here we have a skull ring which is downloadable. I'm going to select the STL version. Same thing with the other ring. This ring is better because it has like all the sizes, as you can see. I'm going to select whatever, the US 9. Alright guys, we have downloaded two ring for a reason, because I wanted to show you two scenarios, and here we have the ring we downloaded, and I'm going to assume that you have actually designed this ring, which of course you didn't, because this is just an example for the video. Or you want to redesign this ring that you have downloaded. For example, you want to add a gemstones or whatever. But anyway, usually when you design a ring, you will have like millions and millions of polygons. And one thing you should not do, never do, is like slice and print a model with millions of polygons, because you will run into some trouble. And usually you will have a bug during your printing, which of course will lead your printer to stop in mid printing, which is very annoying. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply decimate this model. I'm going to use the decimation master, and usually we want to decimate at 150,000 poly points, which is perfect for this model that has not a lot of details, small details, and also 150,000 poly points is light enough for your slicer and your 3D printer. Alright, so it took a while to decimate this model, but after decimated, I will simply go on the 3D print hub and press on the update size ratio, and this is the step that most of us like forget to do, so you can redo it over and over again just to make sure you have like the correct size. And once it is done, simply export it to your desktop or whatever. Right now we are going to need a slicer, and of course we are going to download Chitubox, the free version. So once downloaded, simply install Chitubox. Alright guys, before moving forward, let's talk a little bit about resin 3D printers, and let me suggest my own opinion about which brands to go with. Of course guys, you don't have to listen to me, you do whatever, you know, I'm not your father or your mentor. But if you have the money, of course aim for the moon, which means that go with Formlabs. But anyway, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you are a broke just like me. So my advice, and this is my personal opinion, go with Elegoo, of course. This is not a sponsored video, and Elegoo is simply the best. They are cheap, and also they have like great quality. And the most important thing, they are creative. They always come up with something new every year. They are not just following the trends, you know. Because you know why? Because they have all the money of the poor people, and they are able to launch new project. Alright, now which version, like which model you should get? Of course, get the newest version, like the 16K. It's not really expensive in my opinion. And the new 16K Elegoo Saturn IV, I believe this is how it calls, has a nice function, which is the tilting function, which eliminates like setting the lifting heights, which I will go through a little bit later. If you ask me what's the difference between older printer and newer printer, it will be more on the workflow. For example, newer printer will be more friendly. You won't have to like tighten up some knobs, or you will have like much cleaner like workflow. You won't splash resin all over the floor because they have like optimized the vat or something like that. But in terms of quality and printing speed, there is like not a real difference, because the quality and speed is set on your resin slicer. I mean resin setting, which is set on your slicer. The quality will be based on the layer height, like how many microns you will go for, and not on the screen. The truth is you won't be able to tell the difference between a 10K and a 16K resolution on your print. And for the print speed, it's the same also. If you have an older printer and set like a resin setting, and if you have a new printer with the same resin setting, guess what? Your printing time will be the same. But anyway, guys, I'm going to assume that you go for another version or another brand, such as mine. I'm going for the Uniformation because it has like a really massive printing plate and printing screen. And also I will show you how to set up your resin settings, your lifting speed, lifting heights, and all of these things. So here we are back on Chitubox Basics, and I'm going to click on my project and simply go to new project. And on the left hand side you will be able to set up your resin printer by simply clicking on this little icon. And setting up your resin printer is quite easy. Simply type like which brand you have. For example, you have the Anycubic, and simply select the model that you have. For me, I have the Uniformation JK3 Ultra. So guys, do not worry if you have another 3D printer brand, because like the setting of your printer will be automatically like set for you by Chitubox, which has like a large database, and they have included like most of the printer model. And then guys, here is like the most confusing part, which is like setting up your resin. This setting right here will be different for you guys based on your brand and the resin brand you have. However, the concept of setting your resin setting will be the same. But before like explaining like how to set up your resin setting, let's talk a little bit about which resin to go for. Alright, as you probably know, there is different type of resin, such as polymer resin, or for jewelry it will be more like castable resin, with brands such as X1, Frozen, and I think the most affordable, the best one will be Saraya Tech, because it is simply the cheapest on the market. However, if you ask my opinion, and again this is my own opinion, I will never go with castable resin, because they are simply like expensive, and they're quite famous for being like viscous, which will lead into like a lot of print failure. So if I was to make my own jewelry, I would rather use like some a simple polymer resin, such as the 8K Elegoo polymer resin. Again, Elegoo, guys, it's the best. It's not the cheapest one, but it's quite the decent brand to go for. Of course, this type of resin is not castable, because I would rather save some money and go for the RTV, like silicone mold method, with the wax injecting machine. And I believe that will be like the smartest move if I was to make my own jewelry, and that will be the only way to mass produce jewelry by yourself. But again guys, I'm not a jeweler. I don't cast my own jewelry, because casting jewelry is another universe, guys. First of all, you need the space, you need the budget to buy your own machine. And if I was to do my own jewelry, I simply would outsource like this service with companies such as this guy right here, which I found them at the jewelry show. And guys, this is the reason why I made those video about walking on the jewelry show. It's for people that who cannot come to Hong Kong and visit those places. So you guys can watch those video without coming, and then like simply like write the company names and simply contact them, you know. And if you're broke, guys, that's your best weapon. It's just like simply asking people for some stuff, you know. Alright, now I will assume that you have chose your resin, and the first thing we have to do is calibrate your resin. So how to calibrate your resin? I will simply go to this three dots right here, click on edit, and I will simply navigate to the resin settings. Calibrating simply of course mean like changing those settings such as the TSMC and also this part right here. Most important thing is finding your exposure times. The best tutorial out there that answer all your questions is simply the complete Resin 3D printing setting guide for beginners by Amera Labs. So just like I said, we will need to find your exposure times. And to find your exposure times, we will have to make some tests by printing this Mega XP Finder or XP Finder exposure test model by Resin, which are the best. So you can go ahead and download this or the Mega XP Finder. And before finding out your exposure time, of course, we will need to set up all of these settings first. First of all, let's talk about the layer height. Like I said in the beginning, the layer height is, in other words, the quality of your prints. So the basic layer heights will be 50 micron. And for jewelry, personally, 50 micron is enough. But if you really want like more details printing, you can go for 30 microns. So the lower microns you go, the better the quality will be. However, the lower you go, the longer the printing time will be, because you have decreased the printing height. Your printer will have to print much more layer. To set up your layer height in Chitubox, you will simply need to dial your setting on the layer section, which is for me 0.05 millimeter, which is the standard layer height. Alright, the next setting will be to set up your bottom layer count. The bottom layer count simply refers to the first draft layers that your printer will print. It's like a protecting layer if you print models without support, and it is also an addition in order for your model to stick to the build plate. I hope it makes sense. So how many bottom layer do you need? So again guys, you can't go wrong with Amera Labs 3D printing settings, and for 50 microns, usually you will need 4 to 6 bottom layers. Of course guys, if you can add more bottom layer, but I don't see like the use case. The next setting will be the exposure time, but like I said, we will need to set up other settings and come back to it later. So down below we will be finding the bottom exposure time. So the bottom exposure time will be the exposure time for your bottom layer. So usually like this setting will be much more higher, because your bottom layer, your first few layer, has to be rock solid in order to stick to your build plate. So to set up your bottom exposure time, you will need to calculate your exposure time, which of course we don't know what exposure time we should set for now. So the easiest way to have an estimation of your exposure time will be go to your resin manufacturer and find out the recommended resin settings, and it should be like something like that. And here we have like a rough estimation for your exposure time, 2.3 to 2.8 for a layer height of 0.05 or 50 microns. And so in Chitubox you can input the recommended exposure time to start with, and now to find your bottom exposure time, you simply have to multiply it by 5 or 8. Of course, to start with, always go with the bigger number. So what does it mean guys? For example, if I start with an exposure time of 2.1, I will simply put 2.1 and multiply it by 8, just like it is recommended. So the result will be 16.8, and you can set your exposure time to 17 seconds. However, you will ask me like, why did I put 42 seconds? It's because I have a large build plate, and as the setting guide recommended, for bigger plate it has to be multiplied by 20 times longer, which means like if I do the math, 2.1 multiplied by 20 will be 42 seconds. Now the next setting will be the transition layer count, which simply refers to the few layers that will be printed in between your model and your bottom layer count, which means your first few layer draft. So this setting is simply optional, and in most cases you can print perfectly well with 0 transition layer count. So for me, of course, I will follow the guide and set it like to 0. So next will be the resting time. Guys, for this setting, just keep it simple. Simply put 1 second for each settings. However, this of course will depends on what type of resin you have. If you have like those casting resin such as the X1, you will need like to adjust this setting and add a little bit more, for example like maybe 1.5 second or 2, because castable resin, like I said, are more viscous. Alright, now let's set up the TSMC settings. This setting is simply like it said, it let us adjust such as the lifting speed and the retracting speed, and also the distance of course. For general use, the recommended button lift distance will be 10 and the lifting distance will be 7. Guys, do not worry about the second row because those settings are just optional, and these settings also make it confusing. For jewelry, you don't really need to set the second stage unless like you are printing some large heavy model that also has a lot of details. Otherwise, just simply stick with the first stage. So 10 and 7 are the safe setting. And now let's go about the lift speed and the retract speed. So the easiest way to find your lifting and retract speed is simply use the setting that your resin manufacturer suggested. So for example, here with the Elegoo, the lifting speed recommendation will be 85. So in Chitubox, you'll simply have to input 85 on the first and the second row. The retract speed will be 300, and you can simply set 300 on your bottom retract speed and also on your retract speed. Alright, now we have successfully set everything we need. And guys, on the bottom part, you generally do not have to use those settings. Most of the printer nowadays are on point, and you don't necessarily need, like for example, the tolerance compensation setting. Alright, now we have our setting. We can like determine the starting exposure time. For example, our manufacturer recommend the exposure time to be between 2.5 to 3. So in Chitubox, you will simply input 2.3 to start with and simply click on save. Alright, now what we will need to do is of course finding out our exposure time, which means that we will have to print our XP Finder that we'll have downloaded earlier. Simply take your XP Finder and simply import it on your slicer, just like that. Once it is done, simply go on export, select it, and simply click on slice. Then go down below on your right hand side and simply click on slice. And after that, you can simply click on save and simply save it on the USB drive that your printer has given. So once you have saved your first sliced model, you can simply save more model at different exposure time. So what I mean by that, for example, I have saved model with 2.1 exposure time. Then you have to increase or decrease by 0.1. So you will have to slice and save, for example, a version in 2.2 second, 2.3, 2.4, or 2 second, 1.9, and 1.8 as an example. So once it is done, you should have like a different model at different exposure time. And then you will need to print each one of them separately in order to find your exposure time. Now it's time to set up your machine, follow the instruction, assemble it, and level up your build plate. After that, you can pour your resin onto your vat. Castable resin will have to be warmed up before using it, and this is where newer machine has some advantage. Some machine have like this automating heating system, which helps if you're living in a cold environment, and it keeps a constant temperature throughout the printing process. Also, newer machine like the JK3 Ultra Pro has an automatic pumping resin system that pour resin automatically to avoid running out of resin while printing. Then plug your USB and select the file you want to print. You want to avoid placing your 3D printer under a space where the sunlights reach, because the resin will cure under the UV light. It should take around 15 minutes to print your testing models. If you don't, you probably have some wrong setting on your resin settings. Once a print finish, simply take out your build plate, take your tool, and then lay your tool flat on the build plate and simply scrap off your model. Do not worry about damaging your build plate, because your build plate, if you take a closer look, it isn't a smooth surface. It has like some really tiny cavity that helps the resin sticking to your build plates. But anyway, your model should come off not too hard and not too soft. If it feels so hard, you probably have to decrease a little bit your bottom exposure time. And if it is like too soft, if it come off like too easily, simply bump up your bottom exposure time. But anyway, this has to be adjusted when you print like real model, and this could be done later. So once it come off, simply scrap off like the residue and the left off resin, and then simply put back your plate onto your machine. And don't clean off your plate with alcohol, because the worst thing you can do is to contaminate your resin with alcohol. Simply like scrap off a little bit like the resin left and then put it back on your machine and do the same process over and over again. Take your 3D printed model and dip it into some isopropyl alcohol, and you can cure it for 5 minutes or simply let it dry off by itself. So how do you know you have the correct exposure time? If you're underexposed, the text or the shapes will be missing. And sometimes if you have really underexposed models, it will feel sticky. If you overexpose, the text will become inflated, just like a bread that is overcooked. So you will definitely need to judge it by your eyes. Alright, now I will assume that you have found out your exposure time by printing off and comparing your 3D printed exposure test. Now it's time to slice your jewelry model. So now it doesn't have to be complicated, because the most annoying part was to set up your resin setting. Now let's take our STL model and simply drop it to our slicing programs. So to navigate on Chitubox, you can right click and drag on your canvas to rotate around. To zoom in and out, simply use the scroll wheel on your mouse. To pan around, press your middle mouse or your scroll wheel, just like that. So now guys, let's talk a little bit about how the 3D printer works and how to orient your model for printing. So the first thing you'll notice is of course this gray grid on the bottom, which simply represent your build plate. This is the size of my build plate, and for you it might be a little bit smaller. Right now your model is placed on the middle by default, and ideally for this model this will be the perfect orientation, because our ring, as you can see, it has like the most important part, which is the skull and the wolf. What we don't want to do is to have like our most detailed part facing our build plate like so. The reason why is simply, as we know, this is our build plate, and our build plate is positioned on our 3D printer this way. This is how our printer prints our model. It starts from nothing and simply print layers by layers until it finishes, of course. However, our printer cannot print on thin air like that. What I mean by that is, if I have a model like that, for example, our printer cannot print this model because it is floating on the space. So in order for our printer to print our model, it has to have some contacts on your build plates. So to fix this problem, we need to add some supports, which is connected from our build plate to our 3D model. So if you have a model with details facing the build plate, you will be adding some supports onto the most important part of your 3D model. And why you don't want to put supports on your most important part? It's because it will leave some supports marks on your model, which means that it will have to leave some marks on the wolf, because you will add supports on the parts which is facing the build plates, and on the bottom parts will be your VET, your 3D screen. So it doesn't require any supports at the bottom over here. So the ideal position for this model will be like that, upside down. facing up. Now, the recommended orientation for any model will be something like that, because if we start from the beginning, we want to have the least contact parts on your build plates. So as I showed you, we have like slightly angle our model, and when it prints, like it have like the minimal contact on your build plate. Compare if I was to print it straight like that, and now if we start from the beginning, it has like a much wider surface when it starts. Of course guys, like each model will have like different process. For example, if we take our second model, for our second model we can of course like print it the same way, but if I assume that my model has few details, like details on the bottom and also on the top, I will probably not print it that way, and I will opt to print it flat like this. Alright, now it's time to add some support. I'm going to select the first ring first and click on the support section, and then I will click on auto support. Now I will always start with middle support, and you don't have to touch anything else. Simply press on apply. Chitubox will do the work for you, and usually the next thing I will do is to click on the overhang detection. Press on high accuracy and detect selected or detect all. So if you have some overhang area, some numbers will appear on the overhang section, which will allow you to select. Now it's telling me that there is 3 areas that has some overhangs. We can simply add some supports where there is some overhangs, just like that. So you probably want to play around a little bit and to find the best angle to place your support. Sometimes you probably want to use like lighter support and try like to place the supports near those areas, which sometimes can be impossible. Alright, in my experience, 3D printers hates sharp edge, such as like that, or for example a cube that has like a sharp edge. And usually what I will do, I'll click on manual support, select the light support, and simply add supports all along the edge. The supports I'm using is light supports because, like I said, if you add for any supports, there will be a marks that will be left on your model. And when using lighter supports, it is easier to manage and to clean it off after you print. And also guys, don't be afraid to add as much supports than it needs. And this is the reason why you don't want to use castable resin, because you simply are going to be afraid of wasting your resin, you know. So usually guys, this is how it is going to look when you print a new model. And it doesn't matter if you have like 10 years of experience in 3D printing model. The truth is you don't want to start printing a new model and go for like the minimal YouTuber resin support idea, because 100% of the time, if you don't have enough support, it will fail. Only when you have successfully 3D printed this model, the next time you print, you can take off some support and probably adjust the speed of your machine. But when you start to print a new model, it's better to take the safe route. Now it is done, you can simply slice your model. Then you can save it on your USB drive. Alright, now let's go ahead and print our model. Make sure you have some type of protection. Before you print any model, make sure you mix properly your resin, especially if it's been sitting on your machine for a few weeks or even months. Using a soft spatula, such as this spatula from Uniformation. Then plug your USB and print your model. Alright, once it is done, take it off and scrap off all the extra resin on your plate. Make sure to not waste any drop of it. Then use your scraper, lay it flat on a plate and simply pull off your 3D models. Scrap all the residue that are left on your plate and simply put back your plate on your machine without any washing. Now you can give a quick wash. Once it is done, you can rinse it with water. Then you can wash your tools with alcohol because the tool are going to be exposed under the UV lights. Once it is done rinsing with water, you can let it dry, and if you want to cure your model, make sure you remove all the support before curing. Of course, you can refine your printed jewelry, sand off all the blemish made by the supports, and here you have your 3D jewelry printed model. So ideally, it will be great if you have a printer dedicated to one type of resin. For example, if you are using casting resin, it will be great if you can use it on your machine and simply dedicate this machine to castable resin. Of course, guys, you can try out other type of resin, but remember, whenever you take out your resin from your vat and you clean it off for your new resin, you are simply damaging your film, because you will be applying some pressure on your film each time you take it off and clean it. You're already damaging your film when you're printing. Your film goes from stiff to soft over the time. And if you print frequently, you must change your film. That's just the way it is. If you have a failed prints, you don't have to take your vat off and clean it off with alcohol. Inside your machine there is a function, a cleaning function, which will print a thick layer that will stick all your previous failed prints on it, so that you can simply remove it and run your machine again. So I hope this video was helpful to you, and everyone who is watching this video, it doesn't matter if you have an expensive 3D machine or a cheap one, because if you don't know how to use it, then it doesn't matter. And an expensive 3D machine, in my opinion, except all the great features, the newer features, the thing that hasn't changed with older machine is the process. You will still have to go through the same process, which means setting up your resin, leveling up your build plate, preparing your model, adding support, etc. And this process is almost impossible to get by, because it's not like some type of Docker where they can remotely have one setting for everyone, because everyone will have a different environment. For me, I'm living in China. I will have a different setting from someone who is living in Canada, for example. So if you don't know how to set up your machine, buying a super expensive one will not be a smart decision. The things that trip me off with all those 3D printing company is that we know that we cannot fix the process, but they aren't also fixing problems. All they do will just be following the trends. If the neighbor are releasing a 16K, then we are just going to copy and follow the trend, instead of fixing some simple problems, such as sending us some warnings like your build plate isn't leveled, your resin is too viscous, or some simple stuff like that. But anyway guys, if you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and see you guys in the next video.